Jacob Zuma stands at the precipice of a political catastrophe so profound that even his most formidable adversaries could never have envisioned such a collapse. The profound irony of this crisis lies not in its origin from external forces, not from the opposition benches, not from investigative journalists, not from political commentators, but from within the very circle of loyalty he cultivated. This downfall has been orchestrated by those he elevated to positions of trust, those he depended upon in moments of vulnerability, and those who once venerated him as a liberator of the people. In communities like KwaMashu, the atmosphere crackles with a volatility born from accumulated disappointment. The voices of MK Party supporters, who cast their ballots with hearts full of hope for meaningful change, now resonate with a bitterness that transcends ordinary political disillusionment. Their frustration carries the weight of betrayal, a sentiment far more corrosive than any defeat inflicted by political adversaries. What was planned as a constructive community engagement in Ward 54 of KwaMashu, an event designed to celebrate civic participation and democratic accountability, instead became a stark revelation of catastrophic leadership failure. The gathering, rather than fostering dialogue, exposed fractures so deep that they rendered the assembled crowd speechless with shock and dismay. A community member rose to deliver what can only be described as a political eulogy. His testimony was saturated with rage, humiliation, and anguish as he articulated a sentiment that reverberated through the crowd: "The nation must forgive us for squandering our vote on this debacle. We have been transformed into objects of ridicule." These were not the calculated words of a political operative reading from opposition talking points. These were the raw, unfiltered expressions of a disillusioned citizen whose faith had been systematically dismantled by the very movement he believed would redeem the nation's promise. When the MK Party exploded onto South Africa's political landscape in 2024, it arrived with the force of a movement that seemed destined to reshape the nation's trajectory. The rhetoric was intoxicating: promises of restored dignity, economic empowerment, and authentic representation for communities long ignored by the political establishment. For countless South Africans, this represented more than just another political alternative. It embodied a potential revolution that would simultaneously challenge the ANC's entrenched failures and the DA's perceived disconnection from the lived realities of ordinary citizens. The electoral results sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Capturing nearly 14% of the national vote, the MK Party shattered conventional political wisdom and reconfigured the parliamentary landscape overnight. What began as a movement dismissed by many as a peripheral rebellion had transformed into a formidable parliamentary force. Across the country, citizens from diverse backgrounds felt the stirrings of genuine optimism, the belief that perhaps, finally, meaningful transformation was within reach. Yet the euphoria proved tragically short-lived. The initial promise quickly dissolved into a disheartening repetition of the very dysfunctions that plague South African politics, merely wrapped in different rhetoric and symbolism. The fissures emerged with alarming rapidity. The MK Party's decision to boycott the inaugural session of the National Assembly was initially interpreted by supporters as a bold statement of principle, a refusal to participate in what they viewed as a compromise system. However, this gesture of defiance was quickly overshadowed by the eruption of internal warfare that began dominating news cycles and social media discourse. The party became consumed by acrimonious disputes over parliamentary representation, power struggles among senior leadership figures, and contradictory messaging from official spokespersons that left both supporters and observers bewildered. South Africans who had invested their hopes in genuine transformation found themselves witnessing a political organization more preoccupied with internecine conflicts than with addressing the substantive issues that affect ordinary people's daily existence. What supporters desperately needed was leadership characterized by clarity of vision, organizational discipline, and unwavering commitment to stated principles. Instead, they received confusion, manufactured drama, and a political movement that seemed to operate under the delusion that performative rebellion could substitute for effective governance. The foundation of MK's appeal rested on an emotional connection forged over years of Zuma positioning himself as a champion of the marginalized, a fearless challenger of entrenched elites and corrupt power structures. Yet in this moment of organizational crisis, that carefully constructed image appears to be crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. Rather than focusing on policy development and legislative strategy, the party's senior leadership has engaged in public mudslinging that undermines any pretense of unity. Court decisions have been dismissed or simply ignored, demonstrating a troubling disregard for constitutional governance. Leaked audio recordings, chaotic press conferences, and factional warfare have completely eclipsed any semblance of organizational coherence. Throughout this escalating chaos, Zuma himself has maintained a conspicuous silence. What some initially interpreted as strategic restraint must now be recognized for what it truly is, an abdication of leadership responsibility. Even a minimal demonstration of solidarity would require him to guide the movement through the turbulence he helped create, yet such leadership remains conspicuously absent. Sinolo Lam, a respected political analyst, cautions that the anger emanating from communities like KwaMashu represents a phenomenon far more significant than localized discontent. Political loyalty, regardless of its intensity, possesses an inherently transient quality. It can sustain a leader through extended periods, but it cannot withstand sustained disappointment and broken promises indefinitely. The fundamental weakness of the MK party lies in its failure to develop organizational capacity beyond mobilization rhetoric. While it proved remarkably effective at assembling large crowds through passionate oratory, it has demonstrated catastrophic inadequacy in building the institutional structures necessary for sustained political effectiveness. Rallying masses with stirring speeches requires charisma. Building a functional political organization that delivers tangible results demands competence, discipline, and genuine commitment, qualities that remain conspicuously absent. For many South Africans, the decision to support the MK party represented an act of hope, a belief that this movement would genuinely fight for economic justice, land redistribution, comprehensive social protection, and systemic transformation. They believed that Zuma would amplify the voices of communities systematically excluded from political discourse and decision-making. However, with each passing week devoid of substantive progress, the promises ring increasingly hollow. Rather than collaborative problem-solving and policy development, the party has devoted its energy to internal recriminations and public accusations. Communities like KwaMashu are left wrestling with the devastating realization that their votes may not have been merely wasted but actively exploited for factional political gain. Now the most damaging questions any political leader can face from their support base are being asked openly and insistently: where is Zuma as his movement disintegrates around him? Where is the strategic plan for restoring organizational unity when it matters most critically? How can internal factions continue gaining strength while community engagement and service delivery collapse? How have the initial guarantees already proven so empty? These questions are no longer whispered in private conversations but voiced publicly at community rallies, funeral gatherings, taxi ranks, and political meetings. The discontent has metastasized beyond a single township, penetrating deeply into other MK strongholds that once pledged unqualified allegiance. What makes this crisis particularly alarming is that the turmoil extends far beyond parliamentary politics. The dysfunction has cascaded down to branch structures, youth leagues, and local committees, the organizational foundation upon which any sustainable political movement must rest. When disillusionment reaches grassroots supporters, the entire edifice becomes structurally unsound. Insider reports suggest that Zuma is aware of this escalating anger but appears to be hoping for organic resolution of internal conflicts, the passive approach that relies more on wishful thinking than strategic intervention. However, hope divorced from action produces nothing of substance. Silence cannot substitute for leadership, particularly when a governing political party teeters on the edge of organizational collapse and supporters desperately cry out for direction. What we are witnessing transcends mere political theater. This is a movement disintegrating from within, and the consequences extend far beyond the MK party itself. A fragmented political landscape breeds competing alliances, undermines governmental stability, and misdirects national attention from urgent priorities, escalating unemployment, deepening poverty, and surging crime rates that threaten community safety and social cohesion. South Africans are observing these developments with intense focus, not merely because of Zuma's personal trajectory but because the MK party's fate reflects broader patterns in our national politics. Citizens have grown exhausted with political organizations that promise transformation while delivering only internal squabbles. They are disillusioned with leaders who proclaim revolutionary intentions but prove incapable of managing even basic organizational harmony. Whether the MK party remains a viable political force or dissolves into historical footnote status depends entirely on immediate actions and decisions, or the continued absence thereof. If Zuma persists in his retreat into silence, allowing factional warfare to continue unchecked, the movement will likely collapse entirely, fragmenting into competing splinter groups devoid of meaningful political influence. The fundamental questions facing South Africa concern whether Zuma possesses the courage, stamina, and determination to lead effectively, and whether he can reclaim the unifying leadership qualities he once demonstrated. Tragically, growing numbers of supporters fear those qualities have been permanently lost. For now, the MK party's future remains shrouded in uncertainty. The anger pervading communities like KwaMashu serves as a stark reminder not only to Zuma but to all political leaders that South African citizens demand more than eloquent rhetoric. They require competent governance, transparent accountability, and tangible improvement in their material conditions. Whether Zuma will internalize these lessons and respond with the leadership his supporters desperately need remains an open question. The coming weeks and months will reveal whether this movement can be salvaged through genuine reform and renewed commitment, or whether it will join the long list of political formations that promised everything and delivered nothing, leaving only disappointment and cynicism in their wake. The stakes could not be higher, not just for one political party, but for the credibility of South Africa's democratic institutions and the faith citizens place in the possibility of meaningful political change.